Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Welcome to another episode of the HR Chat Show. Hello, this is Bill Banham, editor at the HR Gazette and regular host of the show. The boundary between professional and personal life has never been more blurred. In this episode, Dr. Alexander Lovell, research director at the O.C. Tanner Institute, talks with guest host Dr. Bill Howatt about how employees worldwide are increasingly operating in survival mode rather than thriving at work, and why the consequences extend far beyond productivity metrics. Alex introduces Dr. Bill to the survival continuum, a framework that maps the journey from mere survival to genuine thriving. Alex's team has identified three critical pillars determining where employees fall on this continuum: compensation, healthcare access, and the often underestimated power of belonging. The financial reality for many workers is sobering. While executives might imagine employees dreaming of lavish vacations, Alex's research reveals most simply hope for not having an empty bank account by the end of the month. This disconnect between perception and reality represents a significant blind spot for leaders trying to address workplace well-being. Perhaps most illuminating is the discussion around mental health stigma. Despite increased awareness, employees continue to mask anxiety and depression behind more palatable terms like burnout or feeling tired. This linguistic substitution reveals how far we still need to go in normalizing authentic mental health conversations in professional settings. Ready to help your team move from survive to thrive? Listen to this episode with Alex and Bill, and subscribe to the HR Chat Pod and Dr. Bill's new show for more insights on creating workplaces where belonging and well-being drive sustainable performance. I hope you enjoy this episode with Alex and Bill.
Welcome, Alex, Dr. Lovell. Did I say that right?
That is perfect. It's Lovell. I have been called so many different things throughout my life. Everything works.
Okay, so good to have you here. I'm providing a little bit of a guest host for us, my good chap, Bill. I thought perhaps to get us going, Alex, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of an introduction of, who you are. Tell the audience a little bit about what you would like them to know, and kind of sets up today so they understand, who you are as an expert and what we're going to perhaps lead into.
Sure. So again, my name is Dr. Alexander Lovell. I'm the research director for the O.C. Tanner Institute. O.C. Tanner is a rewards and recognition company based out of Salt Lake City. And at the O.C. Tanner Institute, we do a lot of work around employee experience and workplace culture. And you might be wondering, okay, so that's interesting. What kind of research do you actually do? And I'm a political sociologist and kind of a cross with political psychology too. And now you're wondering, what the heck are you doing there? And it's because I do a lot of work around identity and what fulfills us. Mm-hmm. And work is a big central element of our lives. And it's also a big central element of what can either make us really fulfilled or make us really miserable. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great place for me to land because I can do a lot of work around how we can feel fulfilled and what types of work really help drive us towards purpose and meaning and fulfillment, or what can really drag us down and exhaust us and affect our mental well-being and affect our physical well-being. And I am really privileged to work with a team of researchers. We have a clinical psychologist, a political theorist. We actually have a physicist on staff who's a data scientist, sociologist, human behaviorist, organizational design. We have quite a myriad of researchers at the O.C. Tanner Institute also working with me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HR Chat Podcast. If you enjoy the audio content we produce, you'll love our articles on the HR Gazette. Learn more at hrgazette.com. And now, back to the show.
Cool. So the employee experience matters clearly to you folks, and so it's interesting with that work that you did to get to what we're going to ask some questions today about all your work around the survival continuum. Is there a little story of that you want to share of how you got to the survival continuum, and then kind of explain what is the survival continuum to provide context of, the why and the what and how this stuff matters?
You know, you would think that in the COVID years, that survival was the thing that was going to pop up more. And it's interesting, since COVID, employee sentiment has almost deteriorated. And what we began to really find out and uncover is employees are becoming progressively worse. Their mental health continues to progressively deteriorate.
Hmm.
And part of that is related to, I mean, the outside world. We cannot separate ourselves from what is going on around us. We like to pretend that once we enter the workplace that we have a whole different life, but that really isn't quite true. We we are our personal lives and our professional lives all together. There isn't a clean break. And so, as we have financial stressors, as inflation and the cost of living worldwide creeps up on us, as it makes it harder to make ends meet, employees are starting to really feel those burdens. And so, last year was a breaking point for so many people, not just in the United States, but across the world, where the cost of living was just too much. And so, people were making too many sacrifices across the spectrum in their lives to just get food on the table, to find even a quiet space in their life to just exist without the noise of the world creeping in.
Hmm.
And that's where, when we asked them what word was simply the best word to describe their experience, it was survival.
Okay. Wow. So the external adversity loads are really starting to mount up, and it's so before people even get to the workplace. It sounds like your research is finding they're very challenged. So explain what is what is your thesis around the survival continuum, and why should employers care about this thing?
Yeah, so survive and really thrive, and I think that's the interesting thing is survive. We put them on two separate poles, but there's kind of two spectrums inside of them. You have kind of on the survive side, you have low survive and high survive, and then you have low thrive and high thrive. Where you can be high survive, you can feel like you are starting to get it together, but you're not thriving yet. And I think that was an important distinction that we wanted to make, is that just because you felt like you were finally surviving didn't mean that you were even close to entering the thriving realm. And that was important for employees to get across to organizations, was just because I'm finally starting to make ends meet, just because I'm finally starting to feel okay, doesn't mean that you've even helped me hit the mark in terms of my ability to thrive. It's a multifaceted and very nuanced picture. And so on the survive side, we found that there were kind of three elements that were most important to employees. And you'll be unsurprised to hear that compensation was a big component of that.
Hmm.
And organizations, and as we shared some of this research, I get eye rolls when I say that, but I'm sorry that finances are a considerable part of living in today's world, because, money is what helps us pay rent. It's what helps us buy groceries. It's what helps us pay for gas. It's what helps us buy our, do all those things. And when we talked with HR stakeholders, it was interesting the different visions of what money meant. They almost glorify, to some extent, and senior leaders too, lavish vacations and a very different standard of living that they think employees are wanting. And when you talk to employees, the most common types of things that we get is just, I don't want my bank account to be empty by the end of the month. I
Yeah.
would like $100 from month to month.
And I think across North America, the literature in two constructs is pretty clear. Food insecurities around 25 to 30%, and typically between 55 and 60% of the population can get their hands on $1,000. So I'm not surprised that you had that finding. I'm fascinated when you talk to me a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind, around I like the survival continuum. Is the upper end of that continuum, putting my kind of mental health hat on, is that similar to languishing, the upper part of it? Like I'm still functioning a little bit. Things are a little bit blah. I'm doing okay. Where if you move down the continuum in yours, you're losing more functioning. Is perhaps you could round that out a bit for me.
Yeah, you the further down you go, I think the closer to hopelessness you get. I think I think hopelessness is probably one of the bigger emotions that we linked to
Okay.
that. Um, if you want to go down your more, I would say, typical fight or flight types of mentality and those types of vocabulary, also that when you look at our qualitative, those types of words are often used to describe the further on that side of the spectrum that you go, that is what happens. People get into that fight or flight and that tunnel vision. You can see that tunnel vision happen for people. They can't see anything but getting out of that,
Mm,
that financial issue. But it's not just financial. That's where I say that's one of those three.
yeah.
Physical and mental health care are also components. We have people talking about, well, I could make ends meet, but my health insurance was just so bad that I had to go elsewhere. I had to take a pay cut, but this other place had better health insurance and I was able to take care of myself better. Or I have this healthcare problem that this other place helped me access better healthcare. Or like I couldn't take days off to go see my therapist. And so I needed to be able to do that. Like, so it's interesting how people, really prioritize their access to healthcare or their ability to pay for healthcare as part of that survival need.
Hmm.
And that has even changed, right? When I look at some of the work that we did back even in 2018, I think something shifted for people during the COVID years in terms of the prioritization, even on physical and mental health,
Hmm.
uh, to in a good extent. I
Hmm.
think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good shift. Terrible thing to go through, but a good shift nonetheless in terms of our prioritization of health.
Hmm. So let's keep pulling on that thread now. So as we talk more about the survival continuum and what you're finding in this general thematic that you're talking about, the interactions now with mental health, how can organizations start to leverage this type of thing, that on the measuring it and that part of it, and why and I guess I like how you're putting, you're helping them. HR folks often need to know the why, so this is a part of it.
Yeah, and mental health care, I mean, I think mental health care is going through almost a renaissance in terms of like we are starting to realize it does matter just like physical health care matters. And we're starting to become more willing to care for our mental health. But an interesting part of our research last year was this finding that we're still not willing to talk about it as much. We're masking terminology.
Mhm.
Um, and what we found is that we're substituting words to make them more palatable to talk about in the workplace. And so we found phraseology of being tired or burned out to really actually be substitutes for anxiety and depression and all sorts of symptomology of those two. Our clinical psychologist actually did some really interesting matching components of people's qual and quant responses and found interesting matching of the symptomology of um, depression and anxiety and the words people would use in the workplace. And they mapped together in really interesting ways.
Hmm.
But people won't actually talk about anxiety and depression in the workplace. They'll focus on burnout.
Yeah, yeah, because it's so socially acceptable, where stigma is still a major barrier. And the thing that I think a lot of people sometimes forget too, Alex, is that what comes first, metabolic syndrome or depression? And I think a part of where your thesis is the employee experience can have a spillover effect on both. Um, I'd like you to kind of keep building on the thematic before we get to what employers can do is how does employees going through this adversity and challenges, and we're seeing an erosion by your thesis, and you're starting to see more folks that are spending time in survival, and there's higher intersects with their impacting their physical health and their mental, how does that all show up in productivity and the engagement and the employee's potential?
Yeah. There's two fundamental things that we found, right? One is in more presenteeism, where you're there, but are you there? Right? You'll show up, but are you doing the work? And so many stories of people being like, well, I'm there, but can I actually do my job? My mind is elsewhere. My mind is on all the many things that I need to get done, that or all the things that I'm worried about, or how I'm going to care for my aging parent that is at home that I can't actually help, and I don't have the money to put into a home or to pay for care. I mean, there's so many facets here that we just don't have answers for. And so presenteeism is a really big drain on our system. And in terms of productivity, presenteeism is probably one of the worst things because you are paying for people to be present but not working.
Oh,
Uh,
100%. Our research in 2012 found that presentism was 7.5 times the cost of attendance on average. And we were pretty clear in how we defined it as the involuntary motivation to come to work to attempt to do your minimal standard, seldom ever can. Root cause can be mental health, can be chronic disease, can be respectful workplace fear, other types of things. But a part you're bringing up, I think that's important for the audience to be mindful is the amount of distraction that's happening and the energy it's required when you're feeling discouraged and when human beings are feeling discouraged. Because the construct of hopelessness, I've seen patients for nearly 40 years. And the thing that's fascinating to me is around that hopelessness, it increases people's risk for automatic suicide ideation. And automatic suicide ideation doesn't mean they're actually suicidal. It's just their crazy creativity system is providing them options they perhaps are pretty overwhelming and shocking to them. So while this is stopping, this is pretty heavy stuff for the average HR practitioner sitting there is going, wow, I got hired, my job is to hire them, bring them in. And now am I supposed to become a psychologist? What am I supposed to do? Like, what's your coaching to HR folks? Like, this is like you and I mean, it only took me 40 years to get to where I am. So, but I mean, someone who cares and really wants to try to be helpful. Like what's your coaching? What can HR teams do? How can they start to move because they can't control payroll. My all of a sudden say we're going to give everyone $10,000 raise this week. Like what can they actually do that you're seeing in the evidence that small things matter?
yeah, I think part of I mentioned three pillars in the survive spectrum. The third one was belonging. And that one's an interesting one, but it has a really fundamental part of survive too, is we are more likely to feel like we can survive when we feel like we belong, when we feel like we're part of something. And that's not going to fix compensation issues, right? And this isn't going to glorify, deficiencies in mental and physical health care, but it can still help us feel safer,
Yes.
and it can help us at least feel like we have a place to be, and that can go a long way. And there's a lot of ways that we can help people lean into belonging. One is recognition. We know that peer-to-peer based recognition can really help, and we know probably more powerfully is leader to employee recognition, and leaders just taking a moment to say, "Hey, I see you. I value you. What you just did is meaningful. This is how it's meaningful. This is how it creates impact." The other thing from a leader perspective, we don't want leaders becoming therapists. That's way out of their job responsibility, and they're not going to be good at it. But leader modeling on talking about harder stuff when leaders can be a little bit more vulnerable about their own, like, wow, I just really struggled with that,
Yes.
and this is how I overcame that, right? And creating a culture or injecting into the culture, because I hate creating culture, culture is there, but injecting into the culture more vulnerability from the top and then letting that trickle down, that it is okay to be human and that humans have emotion, and that in this culture we actually welcome emotion, and that we can talk about the hard things, that we're not just robots, that we can work through hard things together, and that when you're having a hard time, there's resources and support here. I love mental health awareness months, but it's not just about the month, it's actually all about the year. This is a great opportunity to surface all the different programs that maybe we're forgetting about,
Hmm.
that and really connect people back to all those rich resources that I trust most organizations already have. Employee access points, or those different EAPs, a lot of people haven't used. They're very underutilized.
Yeah.
A lot of health insurance in the United States and a lot of other countries have a lot better, more robust mental health access points now than they used to. Um, how do we get people back into those? Can we use this month as a reorientation to those new resources? I think this is where HR can actually do a lot to reconnect people back to how we can really help.
For someone sitting back and saying, "Okay, I like this." What are one or two practical things they can do to start? Let's say they just listen and they go, "Oh, great." Because it's interesting when you talk about an emotion, all an emotion is a neurochemical. You don't pick them, but you can learn how to react to them. And so it's fascinating that the concept that as you start to make this shift, I like what you're talking about, shift and adding to the culture. And what are you going to do? And adding these micro decisions or intentional steps. Because I'm getting that your coaching is going to be you don't eat an elephant all at once. You're going to eat it one bite at a time. So what's one or two things someone to start to say, "Hey, I get the joke around mental health. I get all the things that are happening, but what can we do? What's some coaching?"
Well, I think first is just simply take an inventory of what you have.
Your
My
basic.
guess is that you probably have forgotten everything that you actually have. So reorient yourself to just what you already have. I think
Good.
that's a very simple place to start.
Hmm.
You probably have a lot more resources than you're remembering, than you realize. Ask your peers because they probably know even a couple other ones that you're not even thinking about. I think that's the perfect first place to start. Um,
Yeah, I like that because I think what happens is you do your inventory and then you can determine what the level of engagement is because it's kind of I find often doing this, the low-hanging fruit is actually trying to make sure people are aware of it. And one of the things that it seems to me, I don't know if you found this in your data, is that the conversation around having access to programs creates confusion around the word access. And what I mean by that specifically is when am I allowed to access these programs? So my employer might have a bunch of programs, but I'm driving and I'm eating my lunch and I'm not having any time to stop. I'm in survival mode. I need my paycheck. I may not feel I have a lot of purpose. What's your coaching around making sure we also pay attention to giving space for people to discover this stuff?
2 years ago when we looked at this population, we called them the 80%. And it's the part of the population that doesn't have ready access all the time to all these organizational tools. They often work offline or just part of the time offline. And so we looked at access, and the second word was enablement.
Okay.
And because what we found is that organizations made a big access push, but they forgot about, okay, so great, people can access it, sure. You have all these manufacturing people, for example, that now have organizational email addresses. So what have you done to make sure that they can access their email? That they can actually access their email? Great, you gave them a password. How have you enabled that? And so it's all about building into the flow of work really organic ways to be able to do that. In our kind of technology, in our flow of work, right, we do employee recognition as a technology. How do you actually build recognition into that flow of work in a way that makes it possible? So making sure that there's kiosks if you're in a fully offline environment that doesn't have any space for anything else. Kiosks matter, and they're actually very effective. Mobile apps matter because sometimes people need that. Integrations into your payroll software, because if that's where people are because they have to submit a time card, you can integrate with that type of thing. You can get creative with how you build different types of structures in when you look at where people actually spend their time. You just have to look at where people spend their time because my guess is that people spend their time somewhere. They have to. So it's about building the experience around where people already naturally are.
No, that's a great point. I think, Alex, sometimes we forget the change management. When listening to you, I think about the ATCAR model. You have to have awareness, and then you'd have to have your desire, and then you have your knowledge. Then you need the ability, which is your point, and then you need to reinforce this, and you just kind of keep going that. Well, this has been amazing. We're coming down to almost the end of our chat. And I want to make sure I give some open space to something or things, a couple of points as you reflect on this conversation that you really want to make sure the audience hears that's important from you to them that you think could be helpful as they start to hopefully move more towards thriving than surviving with their workforces.
Yeah, the first thing that I would just love to reinforce is that mental health care and mental health conversations are just still stigmatized. That's something that, as we continue to study mental health in the workplace, the stigma is still there, no matter how much our openness to those conversations continues to be open, that stigma still remains a big barrier. So as we reinforce to HR and as to leaders, to senior leaders, to frontline leaders, that we need to have these conversations, we just need to realize that there is a barrier still. It's uncomfortable and it's okay. We need to just continue that journey. We are about to release our next report in September, and it's interesting. We're going to have kind of a continuation on the mental health component. And it's really exciting because we're tying it to organizational performance management and some really interesting. We pulled from some psychological components from parenting almost, because what we were interested in is how do you balance uh, mental health and really supporting mental health with also a high performance culture? How do you kind of have your cake and eat it too, right? Because I think a lot of organizations have been struggling with supporting mental health, but also wanting high performance. Can you get both? And I think we have an answer for that. You can. So I'm really excited about that. I think the answer lies in, you know, having high expectations, but also marrying that with high support.
Yeah, it
So
sounds like to me sure you're familiar with Amy Edmondson's work. When I listen to you around that whole psych safety component, and it's not really what you're doing when I'm listening to you, it's focusing more on the how and starting to move it. And, it's interesting. I'll reflect on your thinking. I think one of the things that resonates from the conversation that you said to me today that I think is really important for people is around belonging.
Mm-hmm.
We have a scientific study we're publishing through SMU coming out, and we have found that low belonging to high belonging is predicting disability claims, lost time, and etc. And it's amazing that it doesn't take a whole lot for a person to feel welcomed or valued. And it's that intentional behaviors, as you were saying. I think that's really important. You don't need really complicated superstructural systems. You just need human beings who are slowing down and paying attention to other human beings, one interaction at a time. So that's awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. Alex, final thoughts for the audience before we say our goodbyes.
Well, actually, I want to echo your thought on belonging, because what a simple thought it is, and what a reality that it's so easy to make somebody feel like they belong. You just have to lean in and show that they're valued. And then that can start with a simple thank you. I see what you did there. Recognition is just so simple. So why is it so hard to do?
Well, sometimes it's just people forget the value, I believe, is when they get caught up in their own thinking, and if that appreciative inquiry of finding good in other people can actually release nice oxytocin in your own brain by acknowledging and acts of kindness for other people. So I like what your folks are onto, and it's fascinating work, and I'm super grateful Bill gave me the chance to have this conversation with Alex, and I know your organization is doing some great work, so keep up all the good stuff you're doing. So thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.